Venezuela's internationally backed new president Juan Guaido calls for more protests against current leader Nicolas Maduro. Maduro calling the move a coup. More analysis from our Doug Herbert coming up. Plus, as 800,000 government employees in the U.S. go back to work, Donald Trump says another shutdown over his border wall is not off the table. And the French president is meeting his Egyptian counterpart today in Cairo. Emmanuel Macron promising to focus on business and better respect for human rights. Thanks for joining us this hour on France 24. I'm Jeannie Gardula. Venezuela has been locked in a standoff since opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself acting interim president last week. He's since been backed by some 20 countries around the world. Guaido is calling for a nationwide strike and a new mass rally this week. In the meantime, opposition demonstrators have been heading to military bases to try and convince soldiers to join their cause. But as Nick Rushworth explains now, that's no easy feat.
Soldado, amigo,
They've come to an army headquarters in Caracas to persuade soldiers to reject President Nicolas Maduro and join the opposition cause. On offer, an amnesty if the soldiers help return Venezuela to democracy. In response, soldiers burnt the amnesty document. Over at Navy headquarters, opposition MP Ismael Leon had a go, trying to convince troops.
Understanding this document will allow Venezuelans to continue living in a democracy. The country's democracy is in your hands.
The scene was repeated at various locations. The battle is on for the military's backing on both sides of Venezuela's political divide. The country's self-proclaimed acting interim president, opposition leader Juan Guaido, called for army backing after a mass in honor of protesters killed in a government crackdown.
Venezuelan soldiers, I'm speaking to you. Now is the time to get on the side of the Constitution. Now is not the time to be afraid.
So far, the army has stood by Nicolas Maduro, who appeared on television with troops.
They want Venezuela's armed forces to become putschists. Are you putschists? Or are you constitutionalists? Traitors? Never. Loyal? Always.
U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton has weighed in, warning the Venezuelan army and authorities of a significant response for anyone using any violence or intimidation against the opposition or, quote, Venezuela's democratic leader Juan Guaido.
Well, to talk a bit more about this with me now, I've got France 24's Doug Herbert on the set. Doug, we heard Maduro, they're saying this is a coup against him. The U.S. is just trying to install a puppet with Juan Guaido. Even if you disagree with Maduro on the politics, given America's past history of the region, he does have a point.
Well, you could also say he is right to be wary. He's right to be maybe a little paranoid. Look, Donald Trump, we know, he is famously non-interventionist. He's an America firster. He's an isolationist. However, he is surrounded by men in his administration who are not averse to a little intervention. We've had people like Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, National Security Advisor John Bolton, all of them echoing what's called the Monroe Doctrine, even if they don't know it. 19th century doctrine that says areas on America's doorstep, such as Latin America, are subject to intervention if it's in America's national interests. This is what's interesting. Let's look. I have a little chart here to show you the history of recent U.S. interventions in the region. And this is just a little sprinkling, a little suggestion of what's gone on. Go back to 1961. It all started earlier, but the Cuban Bay of Pigs, that's when the U.S. intervened to try to allegedly assassinate Fidel Castro. That was an abortive coup, obviously didn't work. 64, Brazil, U.S. Overthrowing essentially the leftist then president of Brazil, paving the way for decades of military dictatorship. 80s, the famous Ronald Reagan, Iran-Contra, the funding of the Contras in Nicaragua. 1989, the ousting of Manuel Noriega in Panama. 2002, and this is what Maduro has been talking about recently, or alluding to. Hugo Chavez, his predecessor, essentially removed from power for 2 days. Before retaking power, he has accused the U.S. of tacitly orchestrating a coup against him. That was Chavez, 2002. And I'll just note, Elliot Abrams, who was a ghost from administrations past, he was a man very much helpful in the organization organization of the Iran-Contra affair, financing the anti-communist Contras in Nicaragua. He's back on the scene, just been appointed by Donald Trump as the U.S. Special Envoy to Venezuela. He's now the man. So, yeah, you could say Maduro perhaps has in his rights to be a little bit wary there. Is the U.S. reenacting its interventionist schemes and designs of the past?
And the party lines are really starting to be drawn because Maduro does have some very prominent supporters, China, Russia.
And perhaps this is what's right now propping him up, keeping him in there, because we keep looking to the military. The fact of the matter is both Russia and China have invested billions of dollars into Venezuela, and Venezuela owes them a lot of money. Look at this chart here, just a little sprinkling again, right? Moscow, lender of last resort. You know, Maduro has traveled many times to Moscow, as did his predecessor, Chavez. Tight links, both in the military, the energy sector, a lot of investment there. Moscow has lent Caracas a lot of money which they're having harder and harder time paying back as the oil industry, the production plummets. Rosneft is the Russian state oil company. It owns gas fields. It owns oil assets. It owns, by some estimates, Russia, about 13% of Venezuela's oil industry. Billions of dollars in Russian arms sales. We know this. I mentioned Maduro was last in Moscow in December, just last year, 2018. Deals were announced there, $5 billion investment in the oil industry, $1 billion in mining industry, a lot of grain sent from Russia to Venezuela. Joint military exercises. Russian warplanes were recently flying in military exercises in Venezuela. So you could see the tight links militarily, economically, a lot of debt owed, and China too. So this is perhaps something that is driving these people together. Russia does not want to see its ally, a country that owes it a lot of money, all of a sudden falling on its head, because the fact of the matter is the fate of the debt that Venezuela owes to Russia, a lot of it will ride on who emerges as the next leader of that country, because that will be the person who controls the levers of the oil industry. And the oil industry, for better or for worse, is what generates almost all of the revenues right now, and the oil with which Venezuela has been paying its debts.
Doug, thank you for that. France 24's Doug Herbert. Well, staying in the region now, rescue crews in Brazil worked late into the night Sunday, desperate to find some of the 300 people still missing 2 days after a dam burst, triggering major mudslides. 58 people have been confirmed dead so far, but that toll does look set to rise. The rescue operation was stopped for several hours on Sunday over fears a second dam could burst. Our Brazil correspondent Catherine Osborne has more on the efforts to help the survivors.
Hundreds of volunteers from in and around the small city of Brumadinho gathered in city sport courts and public schools on Sunday night to continue to organize donations for victims of the tragedy. One volunteer said, Brumadinho, if it didn't feel like a family before, it does now, because everyone is mobilizing to help those who have survived and many who have lost their homes.
They are all volunteers. Half of them arrived on Friday when the dam broke. Many came from other cities, such as Minas Gerais, São Paulo, as well as other cities. They all want to cooperate after this tragedy.
Everyone shares the same grief. Everyone shows the same sadness on their faces, because Brumadinho is a very small town. So a little over 300 people missing represents more than 1% of the population. Everyone knows someone who is missing.
All of Brazil is sending clothes to Brumadinho. Everybody wants to help.
In addition to the local solidarity here in Brumadinho, help has arrived from other parts of the country. Over 200 Brazilian firefighters from other states have arrived to help out with rescue efforts, as have over 100 Israeli disaster relief professionals who are specialized in complicated rescue situations. They will be helping with the work of finding those final survivors of the tragedy.
Catherine Osborne there reporting from Brazil. Next, U.S. Senator Kamala Harris has formally kicked off her presidential campaign. The California Democrat says she is the best option to unite America. Her campaign is filled with historic possibility. If Harris wins the White House, she'll be the first African-American woman and the first person of Asian descent to do so. Harris made her announcement Sunday in her hometown of Oakland. Now, also in the U.S., 800,000 federal employees are going back to work today, but Donald Trump's standoff with congressional Democrats over his border wall is still far from over. The money the president approved to stop the government shutdown is just temporary, funding the agencies until only February 15th. Speaking to the Wall Street Journal, Trump said the odds the Democrats would come up with a deal to end the standoff were less than 50-50, and that another shutdown was not off the table. Yana Lee reports.
Park rangers are back in the D.C. area, guiding tourists at national monuments such as the Lincoln Memorial. Public museums, monuments and research labs are reopening after a 35-day government shutdown. For over a month, some 800,000 federal employees did not receive their paychecks.
I think certainly for most employees, there's a sense of relief, not only the opportunity to get back to work and the work that they love to do, but the relief that the uncertainty of when that next paycheck is coming in has been taken care of.
Last Friday, Donald Trump announced he would temporarily end what had become the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Standard & Poor's says it cost the economy $6 billion. Though some venues, such as Ford's Theatre, are already back in business, elsewhere the repercussions of the shutdown continue to be felt. Federal employees will return to huge backlogs and missed deadlines. The government's partial closure affected tourist attractions, but also places like NASA and the Internal Revenue Service. A government watchdog group for the IRS says it could take a year for the tax collector to catch up on lost time. Tax season starts this Monday, and there could be a ripple effect on refunds this year. Though Trump has promised back pay for civil servants, the reprieve may be short-lived. The president has threatened another shutdown in February if he doesn't get congressional backing for his U.S.-Mexico border wall.
French President Emmanuel Macron is meeting his Egyptian counterpart in Cairo today. The visit is set to focus on the economy at a time when Franco-Egyptian relations have never been as close. For France, Egypt does remain a key partner in the region despite a continually worsening climate for human rights, particularly freedom of expression. Our team in Cairo reports.
An editorial meeting in the offices of Madamas, the last independent outlet in Egypt. Reporters Without Borders has rated it among the 20 most dangerous countries in the world for journalists.
Our website was blocked a year ago, in 2017. This is a very difficult time. It's even worse than the period before the revolution, when there were already many limitations for journalists.
500 websites are blocked in Egypt, and at least 38 journalists are currently imprisoned due to their work. As a result of this repression, few Egyptians dare to risk showing their faces on camera. Very rarely, some refuse to give in to this fear. Such is the case with independent publisher Mohammed Hesham.
There are many different types of censorship, especially a kind of social censorship, where lawyers do nothing else but hunt down authors or encourage their surveillance.
Because of this clip, the belly dancer shown here was given 6 months in prison for inciting debauchery. As for this puppet from a television show, she provoked the anger of a lawyer who judged her language to be incompatible with Egyptian values and took the case to court. We met with the lawyer. Samir Sabri has already tried 2,710 cases for immorality. For him, informing on others is his duty as a citizen, encouraged by the government.
Right now, the authorities' policy is geared towards purifying society of all immoral acts, violations, corruption, all these kinds of things.
Sabri was the lawyer who convicted this man for blasphemy. Before selling fish, Mohammed Abdullah Nasser was a regular figure on television, but his criticism of religion swiftly brought him a stay in prison, where he spent just under a year. Now free, his perspective is an unusual one.
The only moment where I could truly speak freely and say all that I wanted was when I was in prison. I could have gone mad, but I chose to accept the verdict. And prison became a space of freedom for me.
It's unclear if the 60,000 political prisoners or prisoners of conscience arrested under the regime of President Sisi also see Egyptian jails as places of freedom.
And we'll wrap up now in Hollywood with a look at last night's Screen Actors Guild Awards. It was a big night for Black Panther. The superhero movie won the coveted Best Ensemble Award, setting it up for a potential score at the upcoming Academy Awards. In the individual acting categories, Glenn Close and Rami Malek solidified their positions as frontrunners with Best Acting wins that followed their triumphs at the Golden Globes. Close winning for The Wife, and Malek for his portrayal of Freddie Mercury in Bohemian Rhapsody. Stay with us here on France 24. I'll be back in about 15 minutes with more headlines.
It's the home of pizza, Pavarotti and La Dolce Vita, but we are looking beyond the stereotypes in our Talking Europe special all about Italy. We're finding out how Italians are moving on from a devastating bridge collapse here in Genoa last August. We're finding out about the impact of new so-called anti-migrant laws and asking how an uneasy coalition of two populist forces is working out in government. Stay tuned to France 24 for our Talking Europe Italy special.